Hey everyone, welcome back, and if you're new here, welcome to my channel. My name is Christina Kent, and I'm a fine artist based out of San Francisco. And today I'm here with my friend Megan Broughton, who is an artist and an experimental printmaker here in San Francisco as well. And today we wanted to talk a little bit about Megan's artistic background and also dive into her experience with artist residencies. So I know a lot of you are really interested in an artist residency. Maybe you haven't done one before, but you're looking into doing one in the future. And Megan has done some really cool residencies, and I think they've had a big impact on her artistic practice. So I wanted to invite her here today to share a little bit about her experiences doing those residencies. Okay, so let's get started. So Megan, first I wanted to ask you, before we get into talking all about the residencies, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your artistic background so you could share with folks what it was like. Have you always been making art?
Yeah, I kind of grew up with the story that I've been drawing since I could hold a crayon. So yeah, I was definitely that kid in elementary school who always had a box of crayons with them. People were always borrowing things from me. Yeah, I always knew that I wanted to be an artist, and I was really lucky growing up in LA County at a time where there were a lot of community arts programs that were really healthy and thriving, and was really able to grow up going through those. So not just visual arts, but music as well. And so that has really luckily carried me all the way through high school to Cal Arts for the undergrad degree. And then, yeah, it's always been very clear for me whether or not the path there was clear, which maybe you understand. But it feels good to be able to now be able to say I have the skills and the experience and I know how to make it happen. Yeah.
That's great. So you did a lot of community art programs when you were younger, and then at Cal Arts, that was a bachelor's program?
Yeah, so I went to Cal Arts for a Bachelor of Fine Arts in their Fine Arts program, which is notably very open, and you design your own curriculum, whatever you want to do, you really make it happen, and the faculty sort of just there to support it. And then at Cal Arts also, they have a very strong and well-known community arts program, which is one of the ones that I grew up in as a kid. And so I started teaching with that all through Cal Arts, and that really informed the way that I would research my work, or the way that I would try to bring in other nodes of interest to the studio. And so it was really nice to see those two veins of life really come together during undergrad. Yeah.
And when you went to undergrad, were you thinking, I want to be a fine artist?
Undergrad kind of threw me for a loop. I definitely still felt that way, but I think just learned about so many other tracks to take within a fine arts career. And teaching became super important to me during undergrad, and really set me up on a path of working in arts education for a really long time, which is still really important to me. But I think that my interest really shifted more to that than pursuing a fine art career, whatever that is or looks like. And so Cal Arts did do a really good job of making sure that you develop your own interest and ability to make things happen across the whole scope of things, whether it was building up a body of work, or getting a gallery, or developing community arts programs. And I think that was really central for a lot of people actually at that time at Cal Arts. And so several of those people of my peers have started programs that still exist today.
That's awesome.
And so it was very broadening. Definitely in the past couple of years I've gone back to a lot of the lessons learned when I was 18, 19 that I didn't get understand, and you just need some more time maybe. And so I definitely feel that influence coming through really strongly these days. But I would say that between now and then, it was definitely, my focus was on teaching.
I see. Yeah. And did you have artist role models who kind of helped guide you on that path, maybe at school or also in your family? Or
Yeah, definitely at school. Darcy Hubler was the assistant, I think, dean of the art school at that time, and she's just a phenomenal human and artist. And she was very invested in working with young people who were interested in arts pedagogy, especially through the Community Arts Partnership Program. And so Darcy for me is definitely up there. And then you're assigned a mentor at Cal Arts as well. And so my mentor was Millie Wilson. She does these amazing, wonderful works with wigs and crazy hair things. And she's like a very wonderful artist who's now based in Texas. And so we've kept in touch over the years. And it was so nice to be like, Millie, I quit my job. Like, I'm going to be a full-time artist. And she was like, oh my God. But super supportive. Like, guided me through it. So those two women for sure really stuck with me. Yeah, and then I would say my Bay Area people, like the main person's really Stephen Thomas, who was a fine art etcher for many years and worked at Crown Point Press for a very long time, and was one of the people who founded the Oxbow School in Napa, which is the last place that I taught before I left and became a full-time artist.
Yeah, so it sounds like you had a lot of great experiences with art educators when you were learning and growing up. And so, so can you tell me more about after you finished your bachelor's degree, then how did you get from that to where you are today doing art full time?
So I graduated in 2012, and then I actually worked at CalArts for a year. I worked in the portfolio room, which was really illuminating. Helped to manage all the applications coming in and got to help run portfolio reviews for all the different schools at the Institute, which I really loved. And then I, in 2013, started working at the Oxbow School in Napa as their alumni teaching assistant, which is a program that they used to have there. And that was only supposed to be a year-long position. So I went in 2013, and then one thing led to another, and I worked there until 2022.
Wow, okay.
So that I sort of moved up here by accident. But the great thing about Oxbow is that it was a semester boarding school for the visual arts for juniors and seniors in high school. But it was a semester program, so you got new students every 4 months. So you had like a chance every 4 months to like rethink the curriculum you were doing and the programming you were doing. And so it was very much like focused on adaptability, and what was great about that program is like, yes, there was a wonderful humanities program, yes, there was a wonderful arts program, but also like those two programs worked together. And so it really just solidified for me like that way of working. And then I would also there got involved in running or like co-running, we call them Oxpeditions.
Okay.
Grad with most things there. Ox was in front of everything, but we called them Oxpeditions. And so it was like camping and backpacking trips that we would lead the kids on.
Amazing.
Students, teenagers. And that was great. Like I would never do that on my own, but that became super essential. And that's actually what led to, in a not very roundabout way, like all the work that I'm doing now.
Okay, yeah. So, maybe do you want to talk a little bit about, if you could give maybe your artist statement in a nutshell for what you're working on now?
Yeah.
Just to give people, for people who haven't seen your work, to give them a little idea of, I'll throw up some pictures too.
Oh, great.
So they can get an idea, but if you could put in your own words.
I knew I should have practiced in the car.
No worries.
Yeah. At the moment, I am working with ice, fog, and air currents to talk about at-risk local and global environments. I'm really interested in how fog is fog's like a shapeshifter. It plays with your imagination. It really messes with your perception of time and space in a really almost like beautiful sci-fi way, but then also like we live in San Francisco and I'm like the fog is just part of your everyday, and it's this beautiful, really miraculous thing. And then ice. I do a lot of on-site study in the Arctic, so I've done a couple residencies in the Arctic, which we'll talk about. But just like I'm from LA, we don't have any like these huge icebergs and the glaciers. I think the first time I went, I was very much like, I don't know what I'm looking at. I was just fascinated and really love how they are kind of like a record keeper of the history of the world. And so to watch like that history embedded in a glacier fall off and like melt into the ocean is like quite sobering in real time. And so to think about storytelling and record keeping and transformation alongside ice, fog, and air currents in terms of like connecting the entire globe is something that I'm really interested in at the moment. And bringing it all together. So I mean, some of those things have been really long lasting in practice, like ideas of loss and absence. But yeah, definitely right now is an interesting time to try to talk about my work because it's developing a little bit in different directions and starting to kind of work in some different ways. So usually I make experimental etchings that either like don't print the entire etching plate or use stencils to sort of block ink transferring, and so the image becomes quite fractured, and the viewer's never really going to see or understand the full thing. And that's me remembering, watching these glaciers fall apart, the icebergs melt, or trying to navigate around them in a little boat, and like understanding that they're like how important and precious they are, and they just melting, getting lost. So trying to capture that cycle in a 2D art piece. It's going to break. You know what I mean? So yeah, I definitely am excited for the directions that I'm going in at the moment. I'm just trying to take time to figure them out.
That's awesome. Yeah, so you brought up a little bit about the artist residencies, or you hinted a bit about them, and I wanted to say I'm super excited to talk about them more, because we actually, I knew that you did some Arctic residencies, and I happened to be at the same time reading two books actually about the exact place that you had done one of the residencies in Svalbard.
Your eyes got so big.
Yeah, when I found that out, I was so excited. I just felt like, oh, this conversation is meant to be. I wanted to learn everything. So I thought it'd be great if you could share a bit about the artist residencies that you've done, and maybe compare a little bit the different ones, because you've done several. So yeah, what was your first artist residency? What was it like? Can you tell me more about it?
Ever or Arctic?
Oh, you've done before the Arctic too.
I have, but if you want to stay on topic, we can stay on topic.
Okay.
So the first Arctic one, you start with that. The first time I went to the Arctic was in 2019 with the Arctic Circle residency, which is for artists, scientists, and educators. And I was really drawn to the fact that they weren't just issuing a call for artists. They wanted that sort of intersection. And I'd known about it for years. I think it was maybe 10 years old at that time. But up till that point, I didn't feel like I was making work that was relevant. Haha. Things have changed. And so when I went in 2019, I actually went with a coworker who I had been co-running those expeditions with. And so we went with the idea of developing a curriculum that would curricularize those camping trips. He taught environmental science and I taught etching. And so we went with that in mind. And that residency is in Svalbard, which is halfway between Norway and the North Pole, where Women in the Polar Night take place. And that was on a big, tall ship, like an old, picture a pirate ship, but made ice safe. And there were about maybe 40 people total on board. I think there were 30 artists and then a pretty solid crew, because it's a big boat. And we sailed for 2 weeks on the west coast of Svalbard, wherever the weather wanted us to go.
Okay.
Which was definitely a new experience. And I don't know anything about sailing or boats at this point. And so that was a 2-week long introduction to the Arctic, and they definitely said something that's very true. They were the first time you go to Svalbard, or the second time you go to Svalbard is your first time actually being there, because the first time was just totally overwhelming. And the scale of everything is so far beyond what you know. And
the icebergs?
The icebergs, the glaciers, it's just, people call it otherworldly, and that really bothers me. Oh, it's not, and I think that really contributes to feeling this disconnect between us and there, and how we share climate implications, and it's all one planet, and that's also where the interest in air currents comes in currently. But that residency was really lovely because they had a team of Arctic guides on the boat, and so we were sailing, but then we would also land every day and take hikes, and they would just know the story of the place everywhere that we went, and share that with us. And also safety. It's a very everything there is moving. It's not a very you can't just go trundling around on your own,
Right.
And then there's also polar bears, and so we had polar bear guards as well.
Wow.
Which was a lot. Yeah, that was a brand new experience.
Yeah.
But that one was with 30 people on a big boat with a whole dedicated crew. And it was really instrumental in terms of introducing me to the Arctic, especially because we went in 2019, and then the school we were working at shut down for a year in 2020, 2021.
So the program that you were planning
Just never
wow,
happened.
Okay.
Because when we reopened in 2021, the person I went to the residency with left the school, and I left the school, and then so we just it never got to kind of come to fruition in that specific way. It did in many other ways in the curriculum. But what happened when the school shut down is that I just got to work in the print studio all year, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
And it was like the first time I'd ever had that kind of time and space to make work. Not even in college. In college you're taking classes and you're working 5 jobs and you're trying to figure out what being 20 means. You're not it wasn't that experience. And so 2020 to 2021 for me was really critical, and that's when I started making work about the Arctic and about the relationships between copperplate etching and the Arctic environment in terms of how the materials interact with each other and the similarities I saw. And so that then, by keeping in touch with people from that residency and seeing what they were doing, some of them then did the residency called Marinum Trees in Greenland, which I then ended up doing in 2023. And that could not be more different from the Arctic Circle residency. It was on a 45-foot sailboat, a bright arm sailboat called the Canute, with just 5 other people.
And five other artists, or?
Yeah, so 2 of them were dedicated crew, but also artists.
And so 5 people total.
6 people total.
6 people total. Okay.
So 4 residents who applied and went, and then the residency director, who was the captain, and then they always hire a friend to be the skipper. But he was also an artist, and so it was just 6 artists on the boat, but very experienced sailors among us. But there was so much more involvement with that. We helped change the sails, and we were on 24/7 ice watches, which have become really influential in the work that I'm making now, and the work that you saw at the show. And so that was just way more involved in terms of the day-to-day of operating the boat. And then that residency actually sailed from Iceland to Greenland, which took 4 days. Wow. And then sailed along some fjords in Greenland near Tassilak, which is the biggest town on the east coast. And then we sailed back to Iceland. And so it was actually those 4 days each time of sailing between the 2 places that was super stuck with me in terms of not seeing land or being being keyed into the wind, because we were on a sailboat. It's there's no wind, and you're just in the middle of the Denmark Strait for a full day, which was the best experience of my life. And then I think what really happened and what really fed a lot of the work happening now was those moments of being in the middle of open water with no land, and so all sense of scale is really gone. And these banks of fog coming towards you, and having to know what an iceberg looks like in the fog is not something I know.
Yeah.
And it's not as straightforward as you think.
Right.
And so all of these sort of really interesting things with your perception and your sight and your judgment and your memory start happening. And I realized how that was all really related to really long-standing interests in my art, not even necessarily related to the Arctic. And so I've forgotten your question. I just started talking. I love talking about these residencies. Yeah,
I want to dive more into the Greenland residency, but first, to go back to your first Arctic residency. So when you were there, you were thinking more from an educational context.
Totally, yeah.
Were you also doing any art making there? Were you sketching? Were you thinking about it? Were you in that moment? Did you feel any inspiration for your art practice?
I kept a sketchbook, and that's the only thing I took. And I don't really think I was thinking of my own art practice in that moment. It was for sure in an educator context, and I really separated that for whatever reason. I only had a sketchbook, and there wasn't necessarily a designated art making space on the ship. But folks were making cyanotype with ocean waters and some other more experimental things. And so there was artistic activity on the boat. But I only kept a sketchbook, and actually I recently looked back at it, and there's way more writing than there are drawings in there. but I, of course, like referred to it heavily. But yeah, no, I wasn't really. And so I think it's really only because of the pandemic in a lot of ways that like I'm making what I'm making now. And like it just all got redirected from curriculum to the studio. Yeah, I feel kind of grateful about that too. Also, that the first time I went was just like, I'm here, you know, like I wasn't trying to like make something or like do a project, and like not having that pressure on it, I think has been really fruitful.
Yeah, I think it's great like when you can go into things with an open mind, because sometimes it's like if you're too goal directed, it's almost like you can kind of cut off the flow, or maybe inspiration is pulling you one direction, but you don't listen because you have this other thing in mind. So it sounds like you came back from that Arctic residency, you had this year where you could spend just really focusing on printmaking. And so is that
basically another residency?
Yeah, that's when some of these things started to develop, these ideas. You mentioned like the relationship between the copper plate printing and the icebergs that started coming up.
Yeah, so one of the earliest etching series that I did following Svalbard was called Pack Ice 2. And that was inspired by a day where the ship got stuck in pack ice, like locked into pack ice for maybe 12 hours or something like that. Very much so. And the pack ice wasn't even supposed to be there that late in the year, but I've been told that happened because ocean currents were interrupted by the melting of the Greenland ice sheet. And so like even there in Svalbard, like Greenland's starting to come in.
And what is pack ice?
Pack ice is,
for us who have not been to the Arctic.
I can tell you all about it. So pack ice, and maybe make sure I get this right when you edit, but pack ice is like typically multi-year ice. Several years old. And it tends to be thicker, like healthy pack ice is thicker pack ice, and it covers the Arctic Ocean. And so when you hear about pack ice melting, like that's the pack ice cover really is a trend of severe damage happening, because that it should be cold enough and there should be enough of like a feedback loop so that stays thick and healthy and insulates the ocean, etc. But when that's melting, you're like drifting too far south, it means that something's going wrong in the ocean currents in the system. And so there's different types of ice. So pack ice is on the ocean. You can also have like land fast ice, which is attached to the land. There's pancake ice.
Oh my God.
Which is flat and shaped like circles, and it like gently bumps up against each other, just sort of forms these like discs of ice, which is great. And so Svalbard definitely, like I said, I grew up in LA, and I don't know anything about ice. Like I went to Big Bear once, you know what I mean? And so being in Svalbard was a really good way to like start to learn about all these different types of ice and realize that it's like sort of like a dictionary of ice. And then like being able to tell what kind of ice you're looking at helps you understand what's actually going on in the environment, not just in like a bigger sense, but also in like a immediate like your safety sense of like where we should go next, or like what's just happened to make that happen, and like reading the environment. And so that's something I was really thinking about when I got back to the studio, and I made the Pack Ice 2 series. So in copper plate etching, right, you're typically using like acid resistant grounds and removing them in a certain way, and then putting that copper plate into acid, and wherever you remove the ground, the acid can get to the bare metal and create your image, and it's like very controlled typically. But then I just realized like I could just leave the copper and the acid unprotected or not to varying degrees, and like overnight, right? And like what would happen then? And what happens is that the copper just starts to totally break down, and you get these really like beautiful lacy lines happening, or like really pitted and holds a lot of ink, and it just really visually starts to look like pack ice, or like ice melting in water. So that's what I meant by the materials overlapping with the form, content form.
And for those of us who aren't super familiar with printmaking, so with the copper plate printing, then once you've kind of taken away some of the layers in certain areas on the copper sheet, do you put ink on that, and then you put some paper down, or how do you actually create these? Because then eventually you have a piece of paper that has ink on it in some design.
Yeah, and so what happens is you've got that copper plate. There's many different ways of creating the image, and they produce different effects, but most of them involve using acid to etch a sunken line under the surface of your plate, and that holds the ink. And so once you have, made your plate, then you apply ink to it. There's a whole process. You have to apply the ink, you have to remove excess ink, you have to make sure that the ink is going into the lines fully so that they're filled. And then that gets set onto a press bed. Etching presses appear a lot of pressure. And then over your plate, you put a piece of dampened paper so it's a bit more malleable, and then that all gets run through the press, and so the ink gets transferred to the paper.
Okay.
So whatever's on your plate is going to be flipped in your final image, because of this movement. And then typically you're going to, making the etching plate is a lot of work, so you're going to apply ink to the whole thing, right? Because you went through the trouble. But what I've started doing is only applying it in certain areas of the plate, and then printing that, and then printing another where ink is in another area of the plate so that it's distinct from the first image, even though it is the same image. And so I've been using that approach to talk about melting and fog, shifting and memory and loss. So it's a super dynamic medium.
Yeah, I remember in the show of yours that I went to, you were talking about the fog and the shifting, which is more about from your second residency, the Greenland residency. So you did your Pack Ice 2 series, and then how did it come about that you did the second residency?
I saw on Instagram that a friend from a Svalbard residency was getting ready for some new artist residency, and she had a photo of her with these special glacier sunglasses on that they block the light and they just look really cool. And so I was like, well, I need those. So what are you doing, and how do I do it? And so it was really because of the sunglasses.
Oh my gosh.
But then also just realizing like I had done the Svalbard residency at such a different time in my life. I was a full-time teacher. I had been for many, many years. It was what I was doing. And then 2020, 2021 really presented a huge shift, and I left teaching temporarily in 2022. And so you understand this struggle. I was doing art full time, in the first year of it, and recognizing that I was still really interested in a lot of these artistic themes, but that I needed more input. And so Mari Mochus kind of came along at the very perfect time, and I was really excited about how much smaller it was, and how much more immediate I felt that it would be to relate to the landscape, or just having to be involved in learning a new skill. I can't take a boat out by myself now at all, but
right.
To be part of that smaller team that could do something like that was really exciting to me. And again, I really only took a sketchbook on that trip too, even though I was going as an artist. But it's it's a tiny boat. So I would really make work, even though that boat had a tiny press on it, which was super fun. But I just sort of love the sketchbook model, and just creating your own sort of dictionary to come back to, your own encyclopedia to come back to. And so I've been referencing that heavily. And it was great. So it just meant that having the sketchbook, the emphasis was on being in the moment and kind of recording it. And so that's been something that I've picked through a lot to figure out what's sticking with me and what feels relevant now, even in my day-to-day life. And the fog is undeniable, and especially living here.
Yeah. I want to touch on something you mentioned, because a lot of times people ask me how do I find residencies? And I think it's great. You mentioned that you saw a friend of yours was doing this residency, and for me it also my favorite residencies have been through hearing about other friends and artists that I know who did the residency. So I think it's great that I think it's something great for people to keep in mind, to see what your friends are doing, see what other artists are doing. And then also, so it sounds like the first residency you were more of a spectator in the Arctic, and then the second one you were a bit more of a participant. If I can put it that way, maybe.
It felt like it. And the Arctic Circle residency is incredible, and the people that run that program are amazing at what they do. But if you're on a huge, I don't want to say huge because it wasn't a cruise ship, and we actually avoided those. But you're on a big tall ship, right? And it's very far out of the water. We would get in, zodiacs, and would be closer to the water than we would hike. But it was the ship held so much, And there was a full crew. There was like a crew of 10, and they cooked and they cleaned and they did all of the maneuvering of the boat, of the ship. And so like you didn't have to do any of that. And then the boat in Greenland was obviously so much smaller. And then we were doing ice watches, and like we made food for each other, and we did all of these things. And so it was just much more, like you said, involved. And I think also just to like considering the size of the residency, like it seems as if maybe I enjoy smaller groups more, you know? And I'm so grateful for the Arctic Circle, and definitely I'm in touch with a lot of those people. But I think that, yeah, the smaller group of Moran retreats really touched me. It was just a very tender experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can you tell me more about, so you mentioned a little bit about kind of the fog, the mystery, the shifting qualities, like thinking about memory too. Can you tell me more about how that second residency really inspired you to dive deeper into those themes?
Yeah, I have a very clear, ironically, memory of one of the ice watches early on. So we were still in the Denmark Strait between Iceland and Greenland, and it had been like clear sunny days, and I was like, this is easy, like, you know, I'll see an iceberg for sure. And then like the horizon got fuzzy, and then we kept sailing, and then, you know, in 5 hours or whatever, there's just this like almost comically gargantuan bank of fog like coming at the bow, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, you know, and like I actually don't know what I'm looking for. And it was just a very, like, I think fog's often used as a metaphor in literature and movies. It's like this sort of like scary, unknowable thing, even though like you know what's in it. Like there's not actually monsters. Although like maybe there could be. And just the scale was so incredible that I had, I guess, never really just looked at it. Really. I was like just that, and I started to think about like smoke screens and the overlap between that and like natural phenomenon. And I was like looking at the bank of fog, and I thought I saw an iceberg, and I was like, I don't know if that's really an iceberg. I like really don't know what I'm looking at. And it turned out to be like whale spouts. But I was like, it's spears of ice, like, you know, just like trying to figure out what's going on. And like, I could not figure out that it was like whale spouts because the scale was just so messed up. And so just like that for me was like a really clear moment of like, you like dumps and you know what you're looking at. But like get to know how to read the environment as best you can. And then, yeah, as the trip progressed, it just was like more and more experiences like that, where it was like you can't see the icebergs in the fog, but you can like hear them, and you can learn how to like tell where they are by smell, or you can like look at other types of ice that you can see and think like, oh, maybe there's like a thicker berg over there because of how this is breaking apart, you know. And so just like how the fog really forced you to focus and like learn a different language in a way. I really loved. And then just thinking of fog as a metaphor for like erasure, in terms of like a lot of my work obviously is rooted on the climate crisis, and so to think of fog as like a tool for talking about science being ignored or erased, or the things that we're losing. And so yeah, it's just become really central to me.
And it sounds like, so you were really keyed in with the environment and seeing what was going on, even smelling the icebergs, which I find fascinating.
It's so funny.
But it sounds like, I mean, not only were you kind of looking for inspiration, but it was also a matter of safety.
Totally.
Like that was the point of doing these ice watches, right?
Yeah, it was a lot more responsibility than I think I ever want ever again. Like super. Yeah, it was definitely for safety. I mean, even a meter across cube of ice can like wreck a boat like that because it can weigh a ton, or no, like 1,000 pounds, something like that. But it's very heavy, you know. And like when your experience with ice is like ice cubes in your glass, to have it be this totally other entity, but like still, you know, in theory it's the same thing. It's just like, again, that idea of scale and like relationships is wild. Yeah, so it was very much about safety. There's various like tools and like maneuverings for getting around icebergs that we had to learn, and Yeah, one of my favorite ice watches was actually at night. And we were there during 24/7 sunlight, but we were also there at a time of year where, like, towards the end, so the last couple nights, the sun would kind of go far enough under the horizon that it was, like, very dark for someone who hadn't seen night in a while. And so I was, like, on deck after midnight. And it was pretty dark for the first time, and I had this, like, 10-foot long stick called a Tuk, a Tuk, and you can't maneuver it around without, like, hitting other parts of the boat. So you just, like, you look ridiculous, and it's pitch black, and, like, every sound for me was a polar bear, and I was like, I'm gonna die. It's, like, totally scary. And then you're like, but then you just, like, push the iceberg away with this, like, stick.
Okay.
Just, like, it's so funny to, like, realize, like, okay, we're fine. You know?
Right.
Yeah, and it's a lot of responsibility, and it was very tiring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so can you tell me a little bit more also about what it was like having, like, that midnight sun and having the constant daylight?
Yeah, I love it. I love it so much. It's super gorgeous. I mean, even though the sun doesn't set, the lighting changes really dramatically throughout the day, even if it's, like, small. But to just see that and be in it, like, it's honestly really hard for me to come back to nighttime. I feel like I'm just, like, missing out, I guess. I don't know. Like, I really love the 24-hour sun. You have to, like, put yourself to bed, you know? But then you just wake up at, like, 3 a.m. and there's still so much to see. Mm-hmm. I think it's wonderful. I definitely took better sunblock the second time I went. So, you know, having to learn how to navigate that, you know, for your skin. But, yeah, it's weird. Coming back to nighttime, I'm very much like, we need to go inside. Like, you shouldn't be out. It's not safe. There's this weird feeling of, like, this really, like, sort of primal shift almost of, like, danger. I don't know. But the 24/7 sun means that, like, you can always go out and there's always something to see. And it really, though, does mess with your perception of time, which is another interest for me now. How it relates to geologic deep time. As opposed to, like, the human time frame. And so I think that, like, having those, like, extended days where it's, like, sunny all throughout the night, it just sort of exists outside of time in a way. Mm-hmm. But again, to go back to, like, don't call it otherworldly. Mm-hmm. You know, so there is always sort of this pull. Like, I think you have to acknowledge that it's, like, a super magical place, but, like, it's real. Mm-hmm. Like, if you wanted to, you could be there today, and that's really important to remember, and, like, those implications. And so, yeah, I mean, if we could have 24/7 sun, I would take it right now.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds, yeah, magical in a way, like the 24/7 sun. And even I know when I'm surrounded by fog, the sense of space it's almost like everything feels very close, but also very infinite at the same time. Mm-hmm. Like, just this strange world. Yeah. But I think, yeah, it's important, like what you say about, you know, it seems like this strange world, but it's also very indicative of things for our own world. It's almost like, you know, the canary in the coal mine. Totally, yeah. For what's going on. Yeah. So, yeah, it sounds like just really incredible to experience that. So can you tell me more about how that residency then impacted the work that you're creating today?
Yeah, so there were a couple things that happened right before going to Greenland that really affected my experience there. The first being that I had I'm sure you were excited to hear this. I had terrible bronchitis, like, the month before I went, and, like, I could not breathe, and I was thinking about airways a lot. And then had either just been reading a book, I can't fully remember, that was talking about like the history of wind and its role in shaping the planet, and then went to Greenland, and there was all of this fog that was often, like, a pink hue, which I somehow haven't mentioned yet, but that was the coolest part. It was, like, often pink, and so that really reminded me of, like, the inside of a human body in a way, especially thinking about, like, my own ability to breathe, and then globally air systems in that sense. And then also, like, we went in 2023, and in some of the towns that we were able to visit and spend some time in, they were, like, old, you know, COVID COVID advisory posters still up about like maintaining distance and breath and masks and all of this. And so like I was really thinking about breathing, which led to the fog being of so much interest to me, I think. And then had also just read a book called Untimely Water, which I cried every time I read, usually on Mooney. So it was like a real cute look. But those two books, the history of, I think it's called Heaven's Breath, the history of natural history of the wind and On Time and Water, and then the bronchitis, like trifecta, really led to thinking about global systems and global interconnectivity. And so fog and air currents really came out of that trip for me as two areas of interest. I'd really only been thinking about ice prior to that. And so what I'm doing, the work that I'm making now, I think is more focused on like changing views of a scene, or like more accurately shifting views of the scene. And then also like interrupting and fragmenting imagery. And so the project I'm working on right now is called Ice Watch Studies. And it uses actually an old copper plate that I made right after I went to Svalbard. And it's a drawing of pack ice.
Svalbard was the first one
in 2019, okay. Yeah. So this is a copper plate from 2019 that has a complete drawing of pack ice on it, that I knew I was never really going to print again. And I was like, well, you always want to reuse copper, right? It's like, don't disrespect the copper. And so I was like, let me see what I can do with this. And so I've started to tear up smaller pieces of paper to use for printing rather than covering the whole plate, and then only inking very small parts of the plate at a time, and then sometimes just like throwing the paper down, and where it lands, and then so that gets you like just a small excerpt of the etching onto this piece of paper, and then I ink a different part of the plate, and I decide however I want the paper to go, and so then I start layering this. And so like the imagery in these etchings comes from a really representational place. Like it comes from this drawing of pack ice. It comes from that experience of seeing it and being there, and the fact that it's real, but then like the etching gets so atmospheric and like kind of unknowable. And so thinking about, I'm thinking about like ice watches in the fog and like learning how to, all that sort of experience, but it's also about like this disconnect of, we live here and I think about that place all the time, but like maybe other people don't, but it's so important that we do. But like a lot, we don't really get to know it, and so like you're never going to see the full image of the iceberg, or the pack ice rather, in those images. And so really just playing with the etching medium in a different way. So rather than, in the earlier work where the materials themselves got destroyed, now it's like the image that comes from it is sort of getting destroyed. It's interesting how the same ideas kind of grow and develop, and as we get like fresh inspiration input.
I think it's awesome how you can kind of bring in this connection with this place that probably most of us will never go to, but that is so important to our planet, and at the same time you can bring in a lot of like beauty and mystery and strangeness into the work too, that just makes it really kind of like arresting when you look at it.
Thanks.
So I think it's really cool, the work that you did, and the work that you're still doing and the way that it's developing from those residencies. I also wanted to ask a little bit, because you're doing another residency now that's very different, very different type of residency. So we've talked a little bit about these residencies where you go and you're getting inspiration, you're making work in a completely different place, which I think is what most people think of when they think of an artist residency. But now you're doing something kind of different. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so now I am just like an ongoing artist in residence at Collage Art Institute in Berkeley, which is a communal print shop, essentially. Like, speaking very basically, it's a print studio that many different people work at, and many of them are local. They also have like a fellowship program that includes housing. Typically those artists come from further afield, and then they also have like a completely wonderful youth arts education program. And so there's just a lot going on over there, but their residency model, like you said, is quite different, at least mostly for the local people. And so with Kala Art Institute, I've been printing there for a year, and I'm usually there like 3 days a week, and you just reserve equipment. And so that's where I do all of my etching and all of my printing. And I've also been teaching adult printmaking classes there, which is a really nice way to just get further involved with that entity and that community. And so, yeah, they've really gone more of a like sustained like workspace route in terms of how they shape their residencies. It's not one of the like limited amount of time, like really like sort of intense things. So people there are really able to just really take their time, and they're very social. So there's a lot of conversations that happen around the work that everybody's doing, which is really nice. And like some of those other residencies, like it is very much about the community, but particularly here it could just be more sustained because people get to know each other more than you definitely would, you know, over like a 2-week, 3-week residency. Yeah.
It also, It also sounds like maybe more accessible to people who have part-time jobs or who can't get away. Because your other residencies, how long were each of those?
They were like 2 and 3 weeks. Okay. Probably closer to 3 weeks. I mean, I've been on others that are like a month long. I've been on one that was like a week long. So, you know, there's like a huge range. But yeah, for sure. I mean, folks who can't take that time away or who don't want to. I mean, like, I've met some people on residencies who are like, can you tell me what the point of this is? It's like, you're here. Like, I don't know, but like I understand because like, you know, some people have different setups or some people have like a collab. Like I'm probably not going to be as feel as motivated to like seek out certain types of residencies now that I like have this working space, you know. Yeah, but that is a good point. There's a lot of different people working there. There's like full-time artists, there's part-time artists, there's people who have full-time day jobs that go in at night, and so that's also really nice in terms of accessibility.
Yeah, it's awesome to know that those different options exist that can work depending on people's life circumstances. So I wanted to ask you, do you have any advice? Because I mean, these residencies sound awesome, and I'm sure people are like, okay, I want to do something
get on a
like
boat
this.
now. Yeah,
exactly. So do you have any advice for people watching, for people listening, if maybe their hobby, like art is kind of their passion, their side thing, or maybe they're full-time or they're kind of transitioning to full-time, what advice would you have for these artists who haven't done a residency but are interested in one?
I think that getting keyed into your local arts environment is really important. Finding those organizations that are good about collecting and disseminating information about residencies, whether they're long-term or short-term. So like here in San Francisco, we have ArtSpan, which does a really good job of sharing the information with people. I also really like going to other artists' websites and just going through their CV. Like, yes, it's actually great. And so, especially like a whole range of people. So like your peers definitely do that, and then like your aspirational artists definitely do that, and like see what their path was. And then I feel like also, you know, these residencies that we do, obviously they're so like buttressed by other activity and other things that you do and other people that you know, and so like just do as much as you can and like really focus on community. So like, you know, I found the Marlin Tree one because two friends did it, you know, like I would not have found it otherwise. And also realize that like not everyone is going to be wanting to do the residencies that make sense for you, the shows that make sense for you, or whatever that makes sense for you. And so like that's really important too. Just like make sure that your art fits where you think you need to apply. Definitely. Because sometimes it doesn't.
Definitely.
And it's not going to help. Yeah, so community, stalk people's CVs, and just make sure it's the right fit. Because that'll also, I think also like make rejection easier, you know, because it's like it's not that you're not good enough, it's that you're not a good fit, and that's really different.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Was there anything about the residencies? I mean, you've shared a lot, and I think this is awesome. Is there anything that you wanted to share about, or that you think it's important to talk about the residencies that I didn't ask you about?
You know, one thing that really stands out about the two Arctic residencies is that there was a huge range of disciplines there. And I've found that I really enjoy that in a residency specifically too, because it's this short amount of time. It's like a really intense pressure cooker almost. And I don't want to be in my own head during that. I don't want to be surrounded by people doing the exact same thing, like all trying to solve the same problems and questions. Like, to have all of these different projects and interests and like approaches in one space is really exciting. And so like in Greenland, there's another printmaker, but she is a lithographer primarily, and she's also an architect. And so we're talking about the architecture of icebergs. There were musicians, there was a sound artist in Svalbard, there were educators, there were fabricators, there were sculptors, there were photographers, like all of these different people coming together is what made them really exciting for me. And so I think that's another thing to think about if you're looking at residencies, like consider if you want to be, if you're a painter, if you want to do with only painters, or if you're an etcher, if you want to do with only etchers, or if you want to talk about like the sounds the ocean makes coming through the pipe and the boat, like that was really exciting for me. And I think has really like fed what I'm doing now, and just in terms of thinking about it in different ways. So like have the people you want to be surrounded by, for sure.
I think that's a great point. Like one of my favorite things about one of the residencies that I did that was a more group-focused residency was just getting that cross-pollination of ideas and meeting people who I never would have met in other circumstances. So that's a really good thing to know. So lastly, I just want to ask about any projects that you want to share that are coming up that you're really excited about, shows, anything like that you want to pitch?
Creative capital, I am in the like early developmental stages of work that I am super excited about. It's more drawing based, which I'm really excited about because in Greenland, like we mostly just drew together, and I hadn't thought that way in a really long time. And so it's just like, come full circle and become like really special to me again. So also integrating etching ideas, but much more drawing focused, and thinking about the overlap, just like the visual overlap between certain natural, like sublime phenomena and man-made disasters. And I've been thinking a lot about materials in terms of like, do I want translucent paper? Do I draw on both sides? Do I overlap it? Do I erase one image out of the other? Like how do I like actually want to talk about that similarity that is sort of at its core for me still talks about loss and transformation? And so I've been calling them blueprints. And I'm just trying to like make a like production schedule, like go about it sort of really methodically. But it came about because I started thinking of I was actually working on another application that sort of called out another residency application actually that called out its proximity to like old World War II barracks and stuff, and like the town's role and I was like, oh, military art. I've never really thought about that. And then I was thinking of those huge banks of fog and how smoke screens are like artificial fog that were heavily used in that area that we were sailing in World War II. And then thinking of my great-granduncle, who was a set designer and property master in Hollywood in the World War II era, and he was hired to camouflage the Boeing plant in Seattle. And they like all these set designers just like went up to Seattle and like made a fake town on top of an airplane factory. And I was like, that's the weirdest, and it's like crazy. And so just to think of like artistry and like artifice, and so like the natural sublime world and like man-made stuff or destruction or like implications is it was like all of these threads sort of started coming together in unexpected ways. And so that sort of really informed blueprints, or this current idea called blueprints. But yeah, I really want to, I think I've spent a lot of time like making work about the Arctic, which for me feels really immediate, but I don't think it always lands for people. And so like, how do you want to still talk about those same things while like bringing in something that is more concrete for people, is something that I'm really working on figuring out myself. And so this has sort of been like the most crystallized idea so far, I think. Yeah.
Well, that sounds awesome. I'm really excited to see. Yeah. No, I'm so excited to see the new work that you're creating. And also, thank you so much for your time to share about these experiences. I really enjoyed this conversation and hearing about your residencies. I hope that everyone joining into really enjoyed it as well. So yeah, thanks much. And yeah, I wish you all the best with the new work.
Thanks, Christine.
Yeah.
Great questions.
A big thanks again to Megan for sharing her experiences with us today. And if you want to see more of her work, you can check out her website at meganbroughton.com, or you can follow her on Instagram at meganbroughtonartist. I hope you enjoyed this interview just as much as I did. If you liked this video, be sure to like, comment, or subscribe to my channel. And you can also support my work on Patreon. As a supporter on Patreon, you get to see my videos early and ad-free, so I hope to see you there. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.